The largest flightless bird alive today is the ostrich. Despite their size, they've managed to keep their adaptations to run quite fast and for quite a while. All thanks to the award-winning engineering of the avian respiratory system, baby! However, pick any other flightless giant bird with us today and you may see a similar thing. They aren't roadrunners, sure, but they can get up and go fast at a moment's notice. If we turn the clock back hundreds of thousands or even millions of years, you'll find that the world was fully stocked with giant flightless birds, some that dwarfed all living forms. Could they skedaddle the same way? Let's find out. Giant flightless birds, more or less, all belong to the very ancient group Paleonthae. This group was one of the first groups to diverge from the true birds and was once quite widespread and diverse with flying and flightless forms. Today they are restricted to the ostriches, emus, rheas, tinamous, kiwis, and cassowaries. The one I want to clue in on is the group that gives us ostriches, Struthionidae. Struthionidae appears in the fossil record around 21 million years ago in Africa. Despite this, it's hypothesized that they originate in Asia because their closest relatives are the Ergolornithids, another group of large flightless birds that were prevalent throughout Asia from the late Eocene to the early Pliocene. In addition to all of this, there is a long prehistory of ostriches and ostrich cousins thriving throughout Eurasia. Plus, there have been all sorts of giant flightless birds globally, ranging from tree browsers to fruit snackers to some of the most terrifying predators since the dinosaurs. But we don't need to get into the weeds of every giant bird just yet. Finding out which of these birds was the largest has been relatively easier than doing the same for non-avian dinosaurs. This is thanks to the recentness of the extinction of the largest of the birds, the Aepyornithids. The Aepyornithids, or elephant birds, were Madagascar's answer to New Zealand's moa. The largest of them all, Aepyornis maximus, may have been the largest bird to ever live. The largest estimates may place it at around 2,200 pounds, 1,000 kilograms, and 3 meters, 9.8 feet in height. The largest moa, Dinornis novaezelandiae, would have stood taller when it stood straight up, at 3.6 meters, 12 feet, though they likely moved around in a more horizontal posture, which would make them significantly shorter in comparison. They were much lighter, at as much as 249 kilograms, 548 pounds for females. What many may be unaware of is that there was a contender that brought a lot of juicy flavors to the party. At some point prior to the 1950s, excavations were conducted in gravel deposits in the Danube Basin, north of Budapest, in the vicinity of Kizlang, which were then dated to between the Villafranchian and Calabrian stage, 3.5 million to 774,000 years ago. Among the fossils found flippin' and flopping out of the rock units were camels, elephants, and hippos, most of which were brought to the Hungarian National Museum, with some also going to the Székesfehérvár Museum. In the summer of 1954, paleontologist Kratoy Miklos became aware of fossils in the Székesfehérvár Museum that may have belonged to camels and weirdly large ostriches, and he published these finds later that year. Eggshell fragments had been coming out of Kizlang for years, but no one had really done any thorough analysis about what they may belong to, with most experts just labeling them as miscellaneous ancient giant ostrich until body fossils could be found. While working through the many specimens collected from Kizlang, Miklos and colleagues found that a toe bone and fossilized copro-urolith had been collected from a giant ostrich new to science. It was the shells, poop, and bone that Miklos used to name a new species of ancient giant ostrich, but he used the convention of subgenus to do so, naming the animal Struthio, Pachystruthio, panonicus. I won't bother to expand upon the actual fossil yet, because the history of this supersized big bird keeps going for well over another half-century, as many more fossils would be found across many other Eurasian countries, with 2 other valid named species. Only after the remains are collected in one place will I think it's time to tell you how impressive these creatures were. All the way back in 1955, a year after Godzilla rose from the sea and destroyed Tokyo and surrounding areas, paleontologists and probably unpaid interns or students from the Institute of Paleobiology at the Academy of Sciences of the Georgian SSR were out in eastern Georgia, the perfect definition of Eurasia, near a place only referred to as Kivabeby. At first, this site seems ungoogleable. However, with your boy on the case, you know I'd eventually crack it. The issue was that basically nobody in North America posts about, talks about, or knows about anything going on with Georgian paleontology. But archaeology, on the other hand, well, all sorts of human evolution information exists out there, and I was able to find that the Kivabeby site is a real fossil locality located in the Sanagi region of eastern Georgia, in the area surrounding Kivabeby Mountain to the south of the village of Magaro. These sediments at Kivabeby have been labeled as Akchagilian, which is a stage of time correlating to layers of rock in the region that date to around 2.5 million years ago, the Piacenzian to Jurassian stages of the Pliocene epoch. Back to the 1950s though. Those students collected a whole bunch of really cool and bizarre animal fossils, including a person-sized hyrax that had eyes elevated on stalks like a hippo. I am, of course, talking about the elusive Kivabeby hyrax. But more relevantly, they found a bunch of super thick eggshells belonging to a giant bird, plus a giant pelvis also belonging to a giant bird. The fossils collected at the Kivabeby site were brought back to the Academy and prepared, studied, and published in the preceding years. It wouldn't be until 1971 that the bird remains would be thoroughly described and named by Nikolai Burchak-Abramovich and Abesalom Vekua in Acta Zoologica Krakowiensia. They determined the remains belonged to a giant ostrich, so they simply named it as a new species of the still-living Struthio genus, Struthio transcaucasicus. Just take a gander at these ancient photographs. It seems to be a little bit bigger than average modern ostriches in basically all measurements, with around a 10% increase in most parts of the pelvis. Not that large, but we are still early on in this critter's history. The next giant ostrich would also be found in Georgia, but from a far more anthropologically fruitful site, right outside of the town of Dmanisi. This site has seen a lot of excavations over the decades, with rhinos, big cats, and all sorts of things coming out of it. Most recently, 5 hominid skulls of questionable affinities were found. From older deposits came the right femur of another giant ostrich collected by folks from the Institutes of History and Paleobiology and described and published by Nikolai Burchak-Abramovich and Abesalom Vekua in 1990. They found that this femur was slightly smaller, at 38 centimeters 15 inches, than the largest fossil ostrich femur known at the time, belonging to Struthio olduvii at 40 centimeters 15.7 inches. However, this was still longer than all other known fossil ostrich femuri known at the time, as well as an average of modern ostriches. The authors found that it was far more robust than other femuri. This was enough for them to name it as Struthio demanicensis. Further discoveries would occur over the next few decades, but it was one particular study published in the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology in 2019 that was able to organize all of these giant bird bones better than anyone had yet done. Paleontologists Nikita Selenkov, Alexander Lavrov, Dmitry Startsev, Inesa Vyslobokova, and Alexei Lopatin took another look at Struthio panonicus, transcaucasicus, and demanicensis, and described a new fossil femur from the Taurida cave in the Crimean Peninsula, dating to the Villafranchian age of the Early Pleistocene, around 2.5 million years ago. which they refer to the species Demanensis. Remember that Quetzoi Miklos had originally named his ostrich with a subgenus, Pachystruthio, so the new team was able to find enough evidence to justify moving that subgenus out of subgenus status and into true genus status, moving all three species out of Struthio and into Pachystruthio. It took us a while to get here, but at least we made it. Gotta love the thick ostrich. The finds of Pachystruthio would not end here though. 2021 saw a paper in Diversity by Eric Beaufetot and Delphine Angst describing another giant femur collected in the 1920s from the Lower Pleistocene Nihawan Formation of North China and brought to France. They did not name this animal as a new species, but just as an indeterminate species of Pachystruthio. Next up is a paper from 2022 describing yet another femur, this time from the Early Pleistocene of Greece and as a member of Pachystruthio demanensis. Finally, 2023 saw Beaufetot publish on another femur, also from China and discovered in the 1930s from the Upper Cave in Shakoudian. The original specimen was one half of a femur and one complete femur, which were assigned to the species Struthio andersoni. The complete one was eventually lost through unknown circumstances, leaving behind only a single plaster cast. Beaufetot found that plaster cast in the London Natural History Museum and used it to justify lumping this large East Asian ostrich into the Pachystruthio genus, though this seems not to have yet caught on. Okay, great. Now we have a complete list of these giant ostriches. What does it all mean? What did they look like? How big were they? What did they eat? And what ate them? Well, as you can see, they were quite widespread across Eurasia. Hungary, Greece, Crimea, Georgia, and China. Considering this is a wide band with missing pieces, I would not be entirely surprised if they were present in many places across this narrow band of Eurasia and have just yet to be found. After all, many other fossil species of ostriches are known from all over Eurasia. No skulls nor necks are known from Pachystruthio, but considering what has been found is rather similar to the living ostrich in general anatomy, most experts think these animals would have looked rather similar to ostriches. The major difference, of course, was the size and heft of those bones that have been found. Even with the larger size and robustness of the bones, the leg bones are not so drastically different from modern ostrich bones as to be adapted for very slow plodding movements. In comparison with the giant Aepyornithids and moa of Madagascar and New Zealand respectively, Pachystruthio seems as though it was still capable of running. Technically, no studies have yet been done to see if these animals could actually run, by the definition of running, which is that at some point in the stride, both feet have to be off the ground. Studies have been done on the behemoth Tyrannosaurus rex, and those tests suggest it may not have been able to technically run. Unlike the elephant birds and moa, Pachystruthio lived alongside an army of predators that could have easily taken it down. So, like the ostriches of today, it needed to be able to run away, even at its size. Though I'd imagine a kick from one of these things would be more than enough to deter most predators, especially when the biggest Ice Age predator it may have met was at or around the size of the modern polar bear. Since no skulls have ever been found, exactly what it ate is a mystery, though one might be able to speculate that its diet wasn't terribly distinct from modern ostriches. But then, why was it so big? How big, you ask? Well, I have been blueballing you this whole time, so I do think it's finally time to bring in everyone's favorite, Mr. Man from
Animal Planet's The Most Extreme,
to actually show you. The largest specimen of Pachystruthio belongs to the Demanensis species, which the 2019 team has estimated at a size of 3.5 meters, 11.5 feet in height, and 450 kilograms or 990 pounds in weight. They decided to scale up Pachystruthio using the proportions of ostriches due to it being so closely related. This is what makes it come out as tall as it is, because ostriches neutrally keep their heads up. Now, the largest moa was the North Island giant moa, Dinornis novaezelandiae, at an estimated 3.6 meters, 12 feet in height, and up to 249 kilograms, 548 pounds. However, this estimate was made assuming the animal held its head up like most modern ratite birds, but it's been found that their center of gravity and tendons would have been under less stress when they held their necks more horizontally. So, this means they mostly kept to a horizontal posture and likely didn't reach up to 12 feet tall most of the time, only when stretching up to grab seeds and leaves from the tallest trees. The last contender for the largest bird to ever live was Aepyornis maximus, which may have been up to 3 meters, 9.8 feet tall, and as much as 1,000 kilograms, 2,200 pounds. All of this means that Pachystruthio were a little lighter than the largest flightless birds, better for running, but taller and noodlier than the elephant birds. Thanks, Mr. Man. Hey, while I have your attention, I have 2 other channels you should check out when you get a chance. Edge of Reality is where I talk about cryptids and the paranormal, anything that is creepy, crawly, and outside of the realm of science. Edge's World of Monsters is where I tackle basically anything fictitious, whether that be kaiju or dragons. What type of feather patterns and organizations Pachystruthio species may have had is even more mysterious than what their faces looked like. Many paleoartists have reconstructed them very similar to living ostriches, but their colors may have been quite different, especially considering they lived in places that were far less dry than the living ostrich range, to say nothing of the fact they were over twice as large. But what was the world of the Titanic ostrich like? The general environment in which Pachystruthio lived can be generalized, but let's not do that, since there are currently 3 valid species of slightly different sizes and places. At the time of all species, the modern human species did not yet exist. We started appearing 300,000 years ago, and Pachystruthia lasted from around 2.5 million to around 700,000 or 600,000 years ago. So they never met or had to fear our species, but plenty of our various cousins probably offered them plenty of hazards. To the adults, sure, but especially to their eggs. The Hungarian Pachystruthio panonicus comes from early Pleistocene Kislong. The sediments are gravels laid down by the power of rivers, suggesting the area was a large riverine system, and most likely a floodplain where lots of animal remains came to rest. The majority of the bones here are disarticulated bits and bobs, but they are all very well preserved. Other critters found in the same horizon have been the long-tusked elephant Anancus arvanensis, the southern mammoth Mammuthus meridionalis, the rhino Stephanorhinus etruscus, camels, voles, pigs, and more. The types of animals found in the locality suggest the area had a warm, dry climate at the time. The time frame of this ostrich species overlaps pretty well with another species in Georgia, at a site in which some hominins more advanced than the Australopithecines were preserved. This means that Pachystruthio panonicus likely encountered some form of human, most likely very early species of the Homo genus. The Georgian remains of Pachystruthio demanicensis come from early Pleistocene deposits, where those hominins I mentioned earlier come from. At the time, the area was temperate, humid, and forested, with lots of dense woodland, as well as gallery forests, open grasslands, bushlands, tree savannas, and rocky terrain with shrubs. Though this sounds nice and livable, there would have been cold winters, though not as cold as modern-day Georgia. You could think of the climate as moderate Mediterranean. Fossils were laid down in a lakeshore environment where many animals came to drink. Rodents, hares, deer, the Stenon zebra, Etruscan rhinoceros, European gazelle, mega bull goat, Sorgelia, bison, giraffids, as well as the carnivorans, Megantereon, Homotherium crenatidens, Panthera gombajogensis, Ursus etruscus, jackals, and Pliocrocata petiae, plus reptiles like lizards and tortoises. The Chinese Pachystruthio were subject to different climates, as some sediments from the time and places where Pachystruthio remains are found indicate warmer, moister climates, or cool, dry climates. The eggshell fossils from some sites indicate they were laid down in glacial episodes. This tells you these animals were robust enough to survive through periodic changes in climate, but also potentially longer periods. I wouldn't be entirely surprised if these Asian forms turned out to be a distinct species someday, as they are quite far from the European forms and may have been hardier to the climate changes in northeast China. The Danube Basin, which holds many of the sediments that preserved Pachystruthio, have also produced some rather bizarre early Pleistocene animals. The Calicothere Hesperotherium, the trunked horse Proboscidiparian, saber-tooths, giant hyrax Postschizotherium, the running hyena Chasmoporthetes, very large Pachycrocutta, the chandelier-head Euclidoceras, dome-headed rhino Elasmotherium, early woolly rhinos, bears, bison, steppe mammoths, a giant cheetah, the shovel-antlered Cynomegalosaurus, and hominins of some sort, likely early members of Homo. The Greek Pachystruthio demanicensis is known from the Crimni 3 fossil site, which dates to the early Pleistocene. Not much is out there on the climate of the early Pleistocene time of Greece, but there were glaciations in the mountains at the time, which would suggest the area was colder than it is today. That being said, the fauna present indicate it was still dry in many places, like it is today. So I suspect it wasn't terribly different from other areas where Pachystruthio is found. At the Crimni 3 site, paleontologists have uncovered dogs, hyenas, bears, horses, rhinos, pigs, the bizarre giraffid Paleotragus, medium-sized deer, the fancy reindeer Premegalosaurus, bison, the mega bull goat Sorgelia, tar, the southern mammoth, the long-horned antelope cow Leptobos, among many others. That's unfortunately about all that can be said of this animal at this time. It disappeared well before the end of the last glacial maximum, possibly a casualty of climate change and the issues that come with that. It's possible the early Homo species that lived with these giant avians were hunting them for the largest Thanksgiving known to humankind, but it's more likely that they were making the world's biggest omelets with their eggs. They just had to look out for Dad. Can you imagine a father Pachystruthio towering over the grasslands or open clearings, seeing over most plants while protecting his flock of children-sized hatchlings? Sure, it's unknown whether they had the same reproductive strategies of modern ostriches, but it's fun to think about. Maybe they had their own unique mating dances and feather duster wings for courtship like those of the modern ostrich. Or maybe they were far more conservative, so large that they didn't need much extra bells and whistles. The best way to understand more about these awesome big birds is to find more of them, though the fossil record can't seem to get enough of their thigh bones. I'm sure if you were an early Homo, those big drumsticks would be irresistible too. For more interesting stories about nature, the history of life, or what goes bump in the night, subscribe, like this video, drop a comment in the comment section below, and hit the bell icon to stay in the know with everything Edge. Thanks for watching.